Mom's Life Day. Today, December 28th, 2022, marks the day and date that I am alive for the same amount of time as my late mother, and from this date forth, I shall outlive her. This is the 23,129th day of my life. On this day, today, December 28th, 2022, I am alive for as long as my mother lived, and from this day forth I shall outlive her. The next day and date when I will be at the same age as one of my parents will be on Monday, September 9th, 2047. When I will be the same age my father was aged on the last day of his physical life, on May 4th, 2015. Dad lived 32,149 days. Upon my father's life day, it will also be my 32,149th day of life. If I survive that long, from that day and date onward, I shall outlive my father, and I will make a similar document to this one on that date, and if I am able to do so. Look for it if you're around on September 9th, 2047. I researched and marked this date of my late mother's life day on my calendar many years ago. Might have been more than 10, 15 years ago, and I put it in my calendar. I have likewise done so for my father's life day, obviously, and I've also done the same for some of my other ancestors, some of which I've outlived already and some I have not. I will mark this milestone day in several ways. I will talk about my mother and her life. Some of you watching may remember when my father died in 2015, and I spent a long time slowly getting over him. Indeed, I am not over him yet. There have been some who have even told me to just get over it, as if getting over it were as simple as switching off a setting in my brain's neural emotional processor. I never had the chance to really grieve Mom's passing. I was diagnosed with cancer a few weeks after her death, and so my grief process was stillborn when I suddenly had to face my major disfiguring surgery, as well as the very real possibility that I would die soon. I did survive the cancer, as you see before you, or else you would not be listening to me right now, watching me on this video, or listening if you're listening to the audio. It's amazing to me how many people in my life insist that because I survived the cancer and the subsequent treatments of disfiguring surgery and chemotherapy, and the fact that the tumors did not remanifest, showed that I was never in any real risk of dying. There are some in my life who have asserted that my claims of potential death during and after those traumatic times was me lying for reasons designed to get attention for some vaguely sinister but unspecified motivations. This is still a factor in some interactions with some of my family and in my social life to this day. Whether I'm talking about events like my cancer crisis 28 years ago or any of my current medical issues. There is so much I could say about my mother. I have about 100 hours of audio recordings of her that I recorded in the last few months of her life. She told me stories of her life, secrets she never told anyone else, and I probably, since I'm the only one who's ever heard them, nobody else knows them either. And I need to digitize and transcribe those tapes and use them as primary source material to write Mom's biography, which was something I told her I was going to do with the tapes at the time. I asked Mom on tape what she wanted her biography to be entitled, and she replied, "The Little Train That Could." In this video, I will now give a brief and hugely abridged biography of my mother. Then I will talk about myself, my life, my status, my future plans and contingencies, life goals, and afterlife legacy goals. Mom's life. My mother was born on November 14th, 1930, and was then given the wrong legal name by some unknown clerk. My mother was supposed to have been named Joanne, spelled J-O space A-N-N-E. Unfortunately, the legal name that came printed out on my mother's birth certificate was the name Joan, J-O-A-N, spelled J-O-A-N, not Joanne, J-O space A-N-N-E. Nobody in the family thought it was important enough to get the correct spelling and thus pronunciation of Mom's intended name, or maybe the legal system was such that correcting such an error would have required a lot of hassle and legal fees. Maybe my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather, Mom's mom and dad, didn't feel there was any point in questioning or challenging the authority. This unwillingness to challenge authority is a theme in my life, as both my mother's side and my father's side do it. As a result, Mom's name is pronounced Joan, not Joanne. This may seem like a little thing, but it kind of sets off, in a weird sense, kind of a theme for the rest of Mom's life, where things don't go as they're supposed to, and then rather than trying to correct things, nobody ever does. My mother was taken away from her mother by her violently abusive, sadistic father, leaving her beaten mother on the side of an Oregon road when Mom was about 9 years old. My mom and her 2 younger brothers were together with their dad, my maternal grandfather, for the next year or so, even if he was often a physically abusive monster. My mother had a plan to get away. Her mother came by for a visit. I don't know if it was the first time they had seen each other or this was a regular thing. It would be one of those questions I would ask Mom. Mom knew how her 2 brothers were. They were tattletales. So she told her 2 younger brothers that she wanted to go off with Mama. They did just as they said and went, we're going to tell. And they ran straight to Daddy and told him that Joan wants to go away with Mama. Dada came into her room. He stood over her and was silent, but it was obviously he was extremely angry. My mother was afraid as he stood over her, glaring at her with fearsome anger and blazing eyes, that he was going to hit her, as apparently he had before. But instead he said in an angry voice, "Get your things and get out of my house." My mother quickly packed what she could, and at the age of 10 left with her mother, who was not ready, planning to have a 10-year-old daughter, suddenly to be a mother of a 10-year-old single daughter, or single mother of a 10-year-old daughter. As a result, my mother got away from a traumatic life from her father and slid into another traumatic life, this time with her mother. My mother's traumatic life with her mother was a different kind of trauma than the kind of trauma she'd had with her father. And that's something I could cover in great detail in another video. If you want to know more, ask. So, Mom had a terrible childhood. Subject of another video. My mother met and married my father, who had his own background of traumas. And then the two of them blended into their own traumatic life. My mother and father both had a lot of trauma in their lives, and they generously and probably unknowingly passed their traumas onto me. And that's going to be the subject of a lot of videos. So a lot happens between the events described and the events coming. My mother and father spent their lives together. A lot of things happened. My mother died of lung cancer at home on March 11th, 1994, while I was asleep. I had been up most of the night, as I had been awake through many nights, because Mom had become nocturnal. Everyone else was asleep, and so I stayed up with Mom to help her through the scary nights. She was afraid as the end came near. I had been up with her all night the night before, and I knew something was coming. It could happen. I'd been expecting it for any minute for weeks. But she just kept on going, almost making me seem like I was being paranoid. My family had really no clue that she was going to die soon. They thought I was just lying or exaggerating or being paranoid or just trying to do something for attention. I finally fell asleep about maybe 6 o'clock in the morning, around sunrise, March 11th, 1994. Having been up with Mom all night, and I think I woke up after probably Dad woke. A few hours later, memory serves me, it was around 9:30, but I'd have to check that. John ran into the bedroom and he shouted something at me, and I just have a feeling it was something along the lines of something's wrong with Mom. I got up, I went into the bedroom. Mom was in the bed. My sister was holding her and screaming, "She's not breathing, she's not breathing, she's not breathing." We called to have the mortuary come to get her, and it took them a long time. I think about an hour, but again, I think I wrote that down and I'd have to go check that. But it was a long time, I thought, and most of the rest of the family went into the backyard, but I got on the bed next to Mom and I talked to her even though I knew she couldn't hear me anymore. Finally, they came and I watched them take her out to the van where they took her away to the mortuary. I'll have more to say in Mom's last days in another document, but let's digress. Wubba lubba dub dub. That's not my catchphrase, unless it is. If I had a catchphrase, it would be potato. Or it's raining tacos. Or something inspirational and sciencey. Yes, sciencey is a word. But I digress. To leave the main subject temporarily in speech or writing. I have digressed a little from my original topic. I just digressed. And now, new subject. It is time to consider myself one at this point in my personal timeline. It seems apparent that I am now probably closer to the end of my life than to the beginning of my life timeline. My life timeline. That's just a fact of being Take two. That's just a fact of being a eukaryote vertebrate mammal hominid sapien dwelling upon the current mixture of That's just a fact of being a eukaryote vertebrate mammalian hominid sapien dwelling in the current mixture of multicultural societies of the current planet Earth. Today, I am 23,129 days old, and every day that passes adds another day to that count. I am younger now than I will ever be again, and I'm older now than I ever have been. I cannot just pretend that my biological machinery that keeps me existing and, hopefully, communicating with my fellow cohort of living sentient beings in the present here and now will continue to function semi-flawlessly. My body can, as has, failed me before, and someday my body will fail me again, and that will be the end of my physical existence and the beginning of my afterlife and the beginning of my afterlife legacy, if any. Maybe I will outlive my 32,149 Maybe I will outlive my 32,149-day-old father. Or maybe I won't. It would be a hugely significant day to me if I match or exceed Dad's lifespan of 88 years and 1 week. Even if I only get to my 80s 17 years from now, I'll be pleased, even if I'd rather go on to have a productive 100th birthday. Possible? Maybe. Plausible? Not given my current life circumstances. But if there are the right changes in my life and circumstances, any of these goals are possible. Yeah, it's about 25 years to where I exceed 25 years till Dad's life day. Will I make it? I have survived many traumatic experiences, physical, mental, more, that would have and have caused others not to survive even this long, 23,129 days. Some examples of this from my life: course, my mother, who died of lung cancer, brought on by smoking. I do not smoke, although as a child I got a lot of secondhand smoke as my parents smoked in the car, smoked in the house. There were times when the house was just thick with gray smoke, no matter what room you went into. I would literally have to go outside to get a breath of fresh air. And that would often provoke my mother or father screaming at me hysterically to get back in the house. And I would ignoring my protestations of not being able to breathe. I remember times when we would be driving on trips or even just night cruises. We'd be in one of the station wagons we had, and the car would be thick with smoke, and I couldn't breathe, and I would roll down the window, and my mother would scream at me. There were times, and it'd be night, I'd roll the window down just a crack, and I'd put my nose into the crack, so that was the only thing. So they couldn't complain necessarily that I was bringing in all the cold air. A small amount, but not much compared to the heater. And my mother would still turn around and scream and slap me like this. Bam, bam, bam. Oh, she had an overhand slapping motion. And forced me to roll up and continue to breathe the toxic smoke. That may be one major factor how at one point in my life, about 20 years ago, I was over 600 pounds. Or close to 600. I don't know my exact weight at that time. All I know is the last time I was able to weigh myself in that era, I was on a recycling scale, and it weighed in 25-pound increments, and it showed I was at 550. So that meant I was more than 550 at that time. Between 550 and 575. I think I got heavier than that, but I don't know. I'm now about 60% of that weight now, but I'm still heavy, and I still need to lose a lot of weight, at least 150 pounds or more. Another example of somebody in my life who's no longer with me, didn't make it to the same level as I, is my late friend Oscar Guadalupe Garcia Rodriguez, who during my teens and early 20s was my best friend, a fellow Boy Scout, a fellow Eagle Scout. He was a role model. He was an idol because he seemed to be smart, and he had girlfriends and seemed to always have the answer and always knew what was going on. And he was always so logical. And sometimes he was mean, but that was the exception. He died suddenly in his early 30s when Dad was in the hospital in 2000. He died unexpectedly and unnecessarily. No, this was he died about the same time Dad did. I didn't find out for about another 6 months. Had Oscar received better medical care, he might now be the mayor of Salinas. He might be congressman or senator. He'd be a community leader. He'd be a person that perhaps people on a regional or national basis would know. I still miss Oscar. Oscar's life and death is a whole big story in itself that I should tell in honor of Oscar's life and legacy, brief as it was. I'm sure I have Oscar's photos somewhere, but likely they're in boxes in storage, and I doubt I have any pictures of him as an adult. Mostly he and I as kids. I have a vague memory of a kid from high school who was always a clown. He was a couple years behind me. I think he was a sophomore when I was a senior. I never really thought of him as a serious person. I didn't dislike him. He wasn't like a close friend, but he was like somebody, you talk to a little bit. He was kind of a distant friend, and who knows, maybe with time might have been more. After high school graduation, I lost track of him for a while until a few years later. It might have been less than a few years, it might have been like a year or two. I heard he was killed in a car crash. And he was one of the first deaths of somebody I knew personally. Of course, maybe the first would be my grandmother. Died when I was 8, but that's another story for another time. If he had not been in this crash, what would he be like now? Would he still be alive? Would something else have taken him out? Would he be one of my social media connections? I mean, it's unlikely that he would be a close friend, but there are people I'm close friends with now that I wouldn't have thought I'd end up being close friends with when they were a daily part of my life. And many other peers of my life are gone. I'm sure there are people I knew in kindergarten who long ago passed, first, second, third, high school. My physical being, my health, my weight, my diet, etc. have to take a new priority now, a big priority. It does no good for me to make plans to celebrate my father's life day in 20, 47, 25-ish years from now if I'm not alive to carry out those plans or to see the consequences of my plans and actions. After all, if I plant a redwood tree, I probably won't be alive to see it pass 150 feet high. But that does not mean that the effort and action of planting that tree was worthless on my part. Because others, including the tree itself, will be around to enjoy its growth into an adult tree for years to come. Sort of like when I teach a youngling how to add 2 numbers together for the first time, and suddenly they know how to add 2 numbers together. And that maybe they go on to be a math whiz, maybe they just learn enough to be able to graduate high school. But I made a difference. I have to have a plan to survive long enough to experience my father's life day in 25-ish years and proceed on to my own 100th year birthday celebrations. And I'm still recovering from the fall and serious leg injury I had in December 2021. It's affecting my movement. It affected my movements for months. And the injury is still a factor in my personal mobility considerations. My leg is still swollen, not grossly, hugely, but still I should probably be wearing my pressure stockings more than I do. Then I had COVID-19 in July, and I felt like it almost killed me. And it left me weak for months. I have a heart condition that could go bad sometime in the next few years. I've had it since I was 19. But whenever it was mentioned, it was just like, oh, that's no problem. And really what doctor should have been telling me is, that's no problem when I was 19. It's no problem when I was 30. Maybe around 40 it's starting to be a problem. Maybe around 50. Maybe around now it's a problem. Basically, the condition is a calcification, a calcium deposit, like scale on a sink, is forming on my aortic valve. And exactly what they would do to fix it, I'm not sure of. Either they would cut it out and put in a new one, an artificial one, or a pig valve, or that they would just go in and somehow knock the scrapings off. I suspect more the former than the latter. Because if they just knocked the scrapings off, they'd be free to float through my body and maybe cause a stroke. So, but my understanding is that the the science has changed. So my doctor said if I had to have the surgery 5 years ago, he would have had to cut me open. And because of my weight, that would have been a problem. Still is. Now they could probably do it laparoscopic through a vein in my leg, threading it up. That's how they did my stent. But this is more complex because they're not just putting in a stent, they're putting in a whole lot of other stuff that has to go in and out. The doctor told me because of my weight, the fat would make it hard to get anything in and out. I mean, they did it, I think because they have to go in through the leg and the larger arteries, as opposed to when they went through my hand to do the stent. The stent was smaller, they could go in through my hand. Fixing the valve requires more room, they have to use the leg. So we talked, and he wants me to be around 200 pounds before he'll do the surgery. That is a target. But my initial goal is to get to 300 pounds, which is about another 60 pounds. And I have been losing weight. So the plan has to be put into effect, or continue the plan, what I'm doing, adding new things. I have to have an economic plan where I can have an income sufficient to keep me living in physical health and safety, even if something totally disabling happens, either permanently or temporarily. If I have this surgery, I don't know how long I'll be out. From what he says, if it goes well, it could be out in weeks, maybe less. I mean, I was only in the hospital for about 4 days, maybe less than that when I had the stent. Something that would have previously required weeks or months of recovery, I was in and out in 4 days. Doctor said it's still considered surgery, just because they don't cut you open like a fish. I'm sure fish don't like being cut open. Teaching. I have a multiple subject teaching credential with English language learner authorization. It's good for about another 3 years because it's preliminary. I have 5 years to make it permanent. That's not the words they use to describe it, but that's close. That's the idea. To do that, I have to get into a classroom teaching position for 2 years. And I've been applying for classroom teaching positions, but I haven't been getting hired. And I have many ideas about why I'm not getting hired. And one of the top is that there is an attitude among some people responsible for hiring teachers that I'm not physically fit enough to be a teacher. I've had conversations with some teachers who think that if you can't run with the kids, you aren't teacher material and you should find a new career. Basically reducing all of the knowledge that I have that I can pass on to zero because I can't run the track with the kids. I'm not helpless, not like I was when I was home and I couldn't even walk, I offered to come in a wheelchair and they wouldn't hear of it. They wouldn't let me. They just said that was not reasonable accommodation. Maybe I have a lawsuit there. Maybe it's something I need to research. If indeed I'm not being hired because of my physical perception of my physical ability, that might be a lawsuit. It's also age. I mean, I'm starting my teaching career at an age where most teachers are thinking of retiring. Yet, I continue to work as a super substitute teacher. Many teachers, many students, many administrators tell me they have such great respect for me, and I've had times when I'll go into classrooms. Like one time I was taking over for this one teacher. He was like, I don't know exactly what you'd call it. Every school has a designated top teacher, and what their job is they're number 3 in the school. They take over when the principal and vice principal are gone. And basically that day I was there because the principal and vice principal were gone, so I had to come and take over his class while he was being acting principal. And when he saw me, he has known me before and he's heard about me. He just told me to do whatever I wanted. He said, I'm not going to micromanage a master. And so I went in, I gave a special lesson on how to tell time to on an analog. I gave a special lesson on how to tell time on an analog clock to his 6th grade class. Many of them had never learned that. I'm sure many of them have already forgotten, but some haven't. There was another time I was at a middle school, and it was a period class. I think it was 8th graders, and I had like 5 or 6 periods. And it's kind of like when you're doing a play, when you do more than one play a day. You know, like on a weekend, like on a Sunday, you might do 2 or 3 plays over, the same play 2 or 3 times during the day. You have what they call, at the time they called the blue hair show, because that's when the elderly women would show up early, like in the early morning. In the morning, the blue hairs would come. They would come, basically mostly older women, but older men too. They'd come to watch the play. And then there might be a matinee show for whoever shows up to that. And then there'd be the evening show, which is like for the people out on their evening date kind of thing. Anyway, back to the middle school, 8th grade middle school. The assignment was to write a 5-paragraph, the assignment was to write a 5-sentence paragraph. And it became rapidly apparent that most of them had no idea how to write a 5-sentence paragraph. So throughout the rest of the day, from period 1 through the rest of the day, I gave each one of them like a 10-minute lesson on how to write a 5-sentence paragraph, which maybe I'll have to reconstruct that and put that online. It's part of my educational video projects that I've mentioned earlier. Anyway, a few weeks later, I'm back at this same school, and I'm walking across campus to a different assignment, and this teacher runs across the campus to me. Now, I rarely meet the teachers, but he knew me for whatever reason, because that's one thing. Word gets around about who I am, and I'm very physically distinctive. So it's like people see me and go, oh, you're Mr. Green. Anyway, he literally ran across campus as I was walking across campus to get to my classroom. And we talked for a minute or so, and he says, you had my class a few weeks ago. What did you do to my students? Suddenly they know how to write. It's like, wow. I just said I gave him a lesson. I couldn't recall exactly what I had said, but I told him that. It's like it just came to me. Anyway, moving on with more teaching, resource teaching. I am considering another teaching path than classroom teaching. That's the resource teacher. This involves getting a teaching credential I do not have. As I said earlier, I have the multiple subject teaching credential with English language learner authorization. That enables me to teach in grades kindergarten through 8th grade as a classroom teacher. In reality, it probably only works at schools that have the 7th and 8th grades as part of their elementary school, such as Chular School goes to 8th grade, and indeed Chular School was my very first day of subbing. I was in an 8th grade class. It was my very first day of subbing. And I've never really written about that in any great detail, other than to say it was happening. And I posted on Facebook, today I'm teaching. Resource teachers, and I've done that assignment too. Basically, I'd have my own room, but instead of having a whole classroom, I would have groups of students. They would come in, I would test them, I would give them lessons, I would give them one-on-one tutoring, I would work with aides. Other things I might do is substitute, either on an emergency or on a planned basis. You know, for instance, let's say a teacher knows she's going to be out for a week, and knows a month ahead of time, and I would just be scheduled that week. I wouldn't be doing any resource teaching. I would just be teaching, subbing for that teacher. Or I could give special lessons where I would be grade level relief, take over for one day, maybe with other subs. Maybe I would teach a special lesson like how to do a 5-sentence paragraph to the 6th graders. And I just rotate, maybe give how to write a 5-sentence, give it to everybody from like 3rd grade through 6th. Just rotate around and give the same lesson, because 3rd grade is when you're supposed to learn that. I think 3rd grade is when you're supposed to learn to write a 5-sentence paragraph. And many don't, even into the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. I'm sure that even some high school seniors don't. And I've taught everything from kindergarten through 12th grade. I've never worked with adults. I've never gotten an assignment to work with the adult school. It's something I would probably welcome the opportunity to do if I could. I would also work with special ed children in what's called mild to moderate. There's mild to moderate, and then there's mild to severe, I think it is. Mild to moderate are kids that you can reach. I mean, you don't want to give up on anybody completely, but I would prefer to work with students that I could reach for the most part. I mean, there are the severe students, and I've had them. They're the ones who they think drooling on themselves and drooling on you is funny. They think running up to, some of them will think running up to another kid and just punching them as hard as they can, or running up to one of the teachers or aides and hitting them as hard as they can is just so funny. One time I had a class where somehow I got left alone with several of the students. All the aides were out. There was no teacher. It was just me. And there was this one student who thought it was so hysterical just to start pounding on students overhead like this, just laughing hysterically like it's the funnest thing. And I was alone, and I couldn't let this kids were like cowering because he was hurting them. I had to go up and actually hold him back. I didn't want to do that because they frown on it. So I was trying to hold him as tightly as I could without holding him so tightly that I would bruise him or hurt him. But it was very difficult, and fortunately, with my mass, I was able to hold on to him, and my hands were still pretty strong in those days, and still are. I was able to hold on to him until an aide came back in and helped me calm him down. Don't really want to work with those kind of students every day. I am not opposed to dealing with them on occasion. I just don't want them to be the focus of my educational pathway. Some people do want that, and it's a necessary pathway. But I think I have enough knowledge to pass on to kids that I need to work with the students that I can reach mentally. Some students just, they can learn, they just haven't had someone to practice with me. Like the story I told earlier, there was a student who just couldn't add two numbers together. And it was simple, like 3 and 6 or something like that. And I had her sit down, and we sat for like 15 minutes. And I went over with her. I told her to use her fingers. And then at one point, it seemed like the light dawned, and her face lit up. And suddenly, she knew how to add. She got it. And I saw her just whip through the rest of the page when she had before been struggling on 6 plus 9, or 9 plus 6, or whatever the number was. Two single-digit numbers. That the answer was another single-digit number. I'd like to think that now she's, I don't know, how far away would she be? She would still be in elementary school, I think. I think she was like a second, maybe she might have been a first grader. So she could be anywhere from, well, she's certainly in elementary school still. Maybe I'll see her again someday, but she may not remember it, and I probably won't know her, because when you're a super sub like me and you're in every school in Salinas, faces blur together. But I like to think that I've positively affected the blur of the lives of those students. Special education is also supposed to work with gifted students, such as students who know how to do trigonometry the third grade. Understand, special education is also supposed to work with gifted students, such as those students who already know how to do trigonometry by the third grade, with students that can sit there and tell you in detail, in the third graders who can sit there and tell you in detail why the Challenger exploded due to faulty frozen O-rings, something that a lot of adults can't even understand. They know the astronomy of the solar system. They can code games and code robots. But usually there aren't any classes for students like that. Or when they're like the NASA classes or the coding classes, especially the after-school classes, not so much the Saturday classes, but the the after-school NASA and coding classes often turn out to have at least a few of the severe type of students. The ones who think throwing their computer at the wall is fun. The one who'll sit in the middle of a lecture about how to do coding, or a lecture about space. And this actually happened. The student just starts screaming, "You're boring, you're boring, you're boring." You know? Constant disruption. So the students who are gifted and who could learn can't learn. I mean, I do understand something needs to be done with kids like that. But it shouldn't entirely be at the expense of the gifted, because I think what happens is we are focusing so much on the severe that we're ignoring the gifted. More on that in another time. Critters. Currently I have 4 dogs and 4 cats, and they are a huge part of my life. This is Fenris. He's my Fenris. He's my baby boy dog. Apophis, he's asleep over here. Oh, he woke up when I pet him. He's stretching. He's a big white cat. He's about 14 years old, and he's probably one of the largest cats I've ever had. Maybe Zuki was about the same size. But he's my cat. Zuki was Mom's cat. And this is my dumb dog here. Fenris. Oh, of all the other cats I have, Apophis, the orange cat, is over off to one side there, sleeping. I have a couple more cats. I have Ma'at, the Ka'at. She's named for the Egyptian goddess of justice. Anubis is named after an Egyptian god, Egyptian Malkat. And Apophis Malkat is named after another Egyptian god. And the fourth cat, she's about a little over 2 years old now, Khonsu. She's named after the Egyptian god of the moon. And they all have, well, what I call the middle name of Maukat, M-A-U-K-A-T. So called because the Egyptian word for cat is Mao. So I just added K-A-T, M-A-U-K-A-T. So whenever I give them any documents, they have my last name, Anubis Maukat Green. Apophis is about 9 years old, and he's a small orange cat who is one of the friendliest cats I've ever had. He cuddles so much and purrs so much, and he'll just walk up to me and shove his face on me and rub it all over like a big old kitty. Khonsu is the baby, and she's the kitten. She kind of went through a stage for about the last year where she wasn't really in the house very much. She was out doing her cat stuff most of the time, and she's out doing cat stuff now. But lately, well, maybe because it's winter, she comes in at night, and she sleeps on my bed. This morning I woke up, and she was laying on my chest, purring away. Well, I don't know if she was actually purring when I woke up. Anubis is off over here purring as I pet him. He was outside for about 5 years, till I caught him and brought him in. And I got him on a leash so he can't leave the house. He doesn't like it, but it's better than him being outside with all the wild cats and all the possibility of dogs and other creatures. The 4 dogs are Delight's puppies. The 4 puppies are siblings from the same litter from their Mama Delight. Mama Delight has been missing for several years, and I miss Delight. Somehow she got out of the yard, and I'll tell that tale separately. But I have her puppies, all 4 of them. Delight's puppies are Dorcas, Delight's daughter, green. Zorita, Delight's daughter, green. Fenris, Delight's daughter, no. Fenris, Delight's son. See how the naming convention goes? The name of the mother and either son or daughter. Don't you, girl? He's giving you love. Yeah. He's loving you. Yeah. He's giving you love. Yeah. That was disconcerting. That doesn't happen very often, much less on camera. So Dorcas is the oldest. Zorita, Delight's daughter. Fenris, Delight's daughter. And Brunhilde, Delight's daughter. The puppies are about 5.5 years old. I have a video of puppy number 1, Dorcas, being born. She was hanging outside, attached by the umbilical cord with the afterbirth still inside Delight. When Delight jumped out of the box and started to run into the backyard. If I had not caught her, I'm sure she would have ran out in the backyard, dropped the puppy outside, and Delight would have died. But I grabbed her just in time, and she gave birth after a long, hard birth to Dorcas. Second was Zarita, so named because on the back of her when she was born she had a white mark that looked like a 2, and she was the second puppy. And since the 2 is very close to a Z in shape, I decided to use it as a Z to give her a Z name, which became Zarita, or Little Fox. That mark is still there, but it's now a straight line. It straightened out as she grew up. And I switched to a still camera for Zarita's puppy birth. I didn't have very good cameras in the day, though, either, so not great video or pictures. I didn't get any video of puppies 3 and 4, Fenris and Brunhilde, because it had been several hours I'd been with them at the time when Zarita finally was born. So I went to the bathroom. When I came back, Delight had jumped out of the box that was on my bed and given birth to the last 2 puppies in my bed. So I don't know which was third and which was fourth. Was it Fenris or Brunhilde and Fenris? So I just call them the baby boy and the baby girl puppies, because Fenris is the only boy and the rest are all girls. More on the doggos and kitties at another time in another video. Ask me if you want to know more. In fact, telling the story of my life, story of my dogs, hopefully that'll be one of the things that people go, this is entertaining enough for me, interesting enough for me, or I just like him enough that I'm going to vote, I'm going to, throw me like a $10 Patreon, or support my next project, or come by and mow my lawn. Or pay somebody to come and mow my lawn. So how should I continue this video? Why am I asking you? You're not even here as I speak this. You can't help me in the future unless you have a time machine to come back to me in the past to give me advice, similar to how I don't. Back to now. I have been a wee bit rambly in this document, you may have noticed. Time and resources are limited as my body and mind's current performance abilities wane. There are so many factors in my life now, and I'm mostly alone these days, and I've been alone for a long time. Every time I start to feel like I'm getting ahead, I have a crisis that knocks me back, knocks me off course, and by the time I get back to it, weeks, months, or years have passed. Just like how if I hadn't gotten cancer and I had finished my engineering degree at Cal Poly, I'd probably now be working for SpaceX or NASA or something like that. I'd probably now have experiments flying on the space station. Maybe. It's very plausible, because that was the path I was on when I was knocked off. And the fact I was knocked off doesn't mean that I wasn't on course to succeed. The serious fall I had last December, where I fell on the concrete on the front porch and destroyed my leg, my knee, hospitalized me for weeks, and then I was stuck at home for months. It showed me just how I'm much more fragile than I previously believed when I was a young, immortal super child, of which I am not so much anymore. Just a little. I've had support from others in my life, people I've never met, but similar support may not reappear if I have such a future need. So it's very difficult to gain resources and savings necessary for long-term survival in the current culture by yourself without working or having a large savings, which I don't have. Recently, I was speaking to my ex. We dated for several years, and we were engaged, and then we broke up, and other things happened. More on that in another document. I am now in semi-regular contact again with her after about 15 years apart. She asked me in our conversation recently, a Zoom call, because she lives very far away. She's not in my personal life in any way, my personal physical life, and not likely to be anytime soon. She asked me if I was going to make a list of New Year's resolutions as she had. And I said that what I'll do is I'll print out I'll make my life plan that I've discussed here several times and print it out with my long-term goals, short-term goals, lifetime goals, legacy goals, midterm goals, short-time and day-to-day goals. And while life is what happens when you make plans, plans can help guide life. Most of the plans I've had have been held in my head, and I think I've done a pretty good job even for that, for very rarely writing my plans down. But an advantage of writing down my plans and revising them periodically and reading through them is that I can keep straight in my head where I'm going and where I've been and what I need to change. Sometimes I'll make a goal and I go, do I really need to do that goal? And put it off in the inactive or no, not doing it categories. Mentally held plans, meaning they're only in your head, can be changed or warped or even forgotten in time due to a personal crisis, which changes the focus of your mind and it leads to forgetting. Whereas if the goals are written down, they can be reviewed and revised and keep the focus. That's a hypothesis anyway. In the near future and the rest of my life, I need to spend much more of my time creating, writing, making digital and physical graphic and art, and doing the things that will enhance the lives of those around me, even if I'm no longer able to do anything. In fact, creativity is probably the key to my financial future. I have ideas for videos for education, politics, animals, cooking, pets. I can create videos and documents, and as I did that kind of thing a lot when I was younger. And I got a lot of recognition for it. I'm very proficient in digital creativity tools like word processing, Photoshop, video production, and more. I want to learn more about making 3D animations to use both in my own works and potentially as hire for other people. Somebody wants me to create a 3D image of their cat. Well, send me a bunch of pictures of your cat and I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can make logos. Logos are in demand and they're simple. Ask people what things inspire them. Look up some mythology or symbolism. Come up with something that can fit on a logo and get paid. Maybe I'll even look into this NFT thing, which seems like most of them are scams, but maybe not all of them. Optimally, I would get a full-time job with an adequate cash income, along with benefits like health, dental, vacation to take care of me into my future and my post-physical work life, because unless I die suddenly, there's probably going to be a point where I'm physically incapable of regularly going to a job site every day. Maybe not. Maybe I'll be able to go almost every day for the rest of my life. That's an accommodation factor, maybe. Especially if I was giving special lessons in person. But I could also be doing lessons from home. There are a lot of jobs online teaching from home. And I'm in the process of changing this whole area into a studio. One of the things I'm going to be doing, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, is painting this wall back here a green color, so that it can be used in as background. I can just digitally take out all the green and put in the picture, whatever picture I'm going to have. Like, I could be in an Arctic tundra, or on the surface of the moon, in Earth orbit, or in a fictional landscape. Have old Faithful blowing in the background. A lot of things I could do. And I will do soon. Because you haven't begun to see what I'm capable of and what I'm about to do. Maybe being a teacher isn't it, either as a classroom or as a resource teacher. Maybe I'll just make so much money with my YouTube channel and my online teaching. Or maybe I'll get hired as a consultant. I'm a smart guy. Maybe somebody needs help setting up their office. I won't set the office up necessarily, but I'll train the staff and set in the policies. Maybe I could manage a special project. Maybe somebody has a machine they're building and they want somebody to be the project manager, just to make sure everything's functioning. All the accountants are accounting, and everyone knows what they're doing, even if I don't know what I'm doing necessarily, because a manager, being able to do something and being able to manage are two different things. Ideally, you want them to be the same person. But I'm very technical, so even though I couldn't build a bridge by myself, I could manage engineers who are bridge builders. I might not understand, for instance, how to make a semiconductor plant work, but I could work with people who do. So maybe teaching is not the path I'll take. And I think, but if I take that kind of a path, it'll be because of the educational videos I make. Because if I make videos on how semiconductor chips are manufactured, and somebody who runs a semiconductor line somewhere, or just an electronics part, or maybe they're just even building widgets of some kind that they're selling, I could be part of that. Or programmer. I'm rambling again. Maybe people will support me by joining my Patreon or various Kickstarters or other means that I'll use to raise funds for these projects. Or maybe people will just throw money into my GoFundMe or Zelle or one of the other ways to pass money, just because they like me and they want to see me succeed, or at least they don't want to see me go away, and they're confident enough that I'm a real person and I'm not just their money spent on me is not just wasted on somebody who isn't making a difference or trying to make a difference. So yeah, I'm making a difference right now because the kitty's purring loud. I have to reach out now to my friends and family and acquaintances. Not all of them. There are people I hope I never see again. I don't want to dwell on that, but there are. And well, If you're wondering if you're one of those people I don't want to see ever again, ask me. Or better yet, if you're absolutely sure because you know why, don't ask me. So, in becoming more well known, people from my past might reappear. I mean, somebody I knew 30, 40, 50 years ago as a nemesis or even an enemy might reappear. Yeah. Friends come and go. Enemies come and go. Both friends and enemies can sometimes return unexpectedly. But I've been alone for so much of my life. Even when I was living with Dad, I was alone. Because he didn't communicate. He always wanted to be the boss man in charge. I was not a person to talk to. I was his son. I was an object for him. And he always felt like he was always ashamed of me. Most particularly when he told me he was ashamed to have anyone know he was my son. That was when I'd gotten a job. I had a summer job going to work at NASA. I was home for 3 days between my first year at Cal Poly and the time I was going to catch the plane in Monterey to go to Virginia to work for NASA. The goal I had told everyone I was working towards when I applied for school. Mom told me that she was going to laugh at me when they threw me out of school. The fact I ended up leaving Cal Poly without a degree my mother would show as proof that I'm incompetent. Never mind, the reason I left was because I had cancer. That detail would be an unimportant side detail in her story about what a loser I am. Dad also was always, no matter what I showed to him that I was smart, he would always act as though I was talking to the stupidest person in the world. He'd say, yeah, but I doubt it, or something like that, no matter what it was. Dad was very isolating. In the years I was taking care of him, he rarely allowed me to have guests over at the house, except for my ex, previously mentioned. I used to take Dad out to events, and he got to be known by many during those days. I used to tell him after he stopped coming with me that he was often the most popular person not at the event because everyone would be asking about him. He rarely wanted to go out for reasons I could go into in another time. But the pattern of not having anyone at my home stuck. And when Dad died, I've had very few visitors. It's not that I don't want people here. It's just I somehow feel like most of the time that's something I need to explore. Why have I not wanted friends to come by? Probably because I didn't really feel I had that many friends. Real friends. I mean, friends I could leave alone in the house and not come back to find they'd let the doors open and all the dogs and cats are out, or they had helped themselves to something in the house, or staked out the house. And yeah, maybe I'm a little paranoid. I've been isolating myself for many reasons, and I'll talk more about that in future videos. Dad and I spent most of the last 15 years of his life together, from the time he went into the hospital and went into his coma, and then later came out of his coma. He started the coma in 2000 and came out in 2001. He went in about a month before the 2000 election, and when he came out, George Bush was president, and Dad hated George Bush. In fact, one of the first signs that I realized Dad was going to survive, I had I'd been playing a CD with video clips of me and music, with telling him where he was. Your name is James Green. You're in the hospital. You had heart surgery. I'm your son, James. Because I figure a lot of people, when they're in surgery and they come out, they don't know what they're doing, where they're at. They don't know what's happening. Nobody's talking to them. They're not saying, Mr. Green, you're in the hospital, over and over again. So, but I also told him to do things like physical exercise. Like one of the things I told him was to point at something on the ceiling, like a spot at the ceiling or on the wall, to practice his hand-eye coordination. And to flex his muscles like isometrics and so on. And I asked my brother and sister to be part of this, but Judy was too far away, so I couldn't get anything from her. And John said it was too weird and refused to participate and used to record anything for the CD. So I put it together with my old technology Mac, which actually it took me a couple of weeks, and I was afraid every day that Dad was going to die before I got the CD ready. I got it ready, got a CD player, a couple of speakers. I set them up next to his bed, set it on shuffle and repeat, and so that he was getting each clip and song separately and in random order so he wouldn't get bored. And Dad said he remembered it later, but one of the things, like I said, pointing up at the ceiling, saying that while he was pointing up at the ceiling, and John, who had previously refused to participate and had no idea that I'd actually gone through with it, and the CD wasn't playing when he was in there, he walks into Dad's room and sees Dad pointing up at the ceiling. John calls me and leaves a message on my voicemail at the time, which was a home recorder hooked up to the telephone line. This is hysterical message saying that Dad wants us to pull the plug because he's pointing at heaven. How John behaved during that time is a subject for a future video. Let's just say he had no belief Dad would make it. And he thought I wasn't facing reality, because he told me that he had faced reality about Dad's death. He knew Dad was going to die. He just knew it. How he knew it, I'll talk about in a different video. That's a story in itself. And, spoiler, he didn't know. It was just something, he got it in his mind Dad was going to die, because he firmly believed Dad was going to die. Dad was going to die. And I was not facing reality. He was facing reality. Dad was going to die. Even though Dad lived another 15 years, I was the one not facing reality. Although, to be fair, everyone was saying Dad was about to die, and I was the only one saying, hey, wait a minute, let's not give up yet. And I did it not because I was relative in denial. I did it because I thought there was a possibility. So I was with Dad for much of the next 15 years after he came out of his coma in 2001. I was there in his various hospitals and nursing homes and rehab centers. I was with him for physical therapy. I was with him with the nurses and the doctors. I went with him with every nurse, every doctor, to be able to understand what they were telling him and tell Dad what was going on and remember for him, because he had a very bad memory that even then. Or he would not understand, or, I remember one time Dad was sick, very, very, very sick, probably had pneumonia. We were in the doctor's office in the ER. Well, we're in the ER. And the doctor walks into us, and he's all gowned up in a wheelchair in the looking yellowish skin. And the doctor says, "How are you doing, Mr. Green?" And he says, "Pretty good, doctor." And I said, "No, you're not." He's not here. He's not asking how you're doing because he's being friendly. He wants to know how you're doing, and you're not doing good. So I would usually tell the doctor what was going on. And that probably had a lot to do with Dad surviving, because instead of the doctor just sending him home with no care, as happened, as was they tried to do several times, more stories for the future. I kept him alive. I took Dad to walk through parks and malls and keep him in shape. I took him to the swimming pools. I have no doubt that Dad would have died in 2000 if I had not been there to advocate for him when everyone, family, friends, and even hospital staff were telling me to give up, stop being selfish. I would ask questions about Dad's condition, and they say, "Us answering your questions and you knowing the answers to those questions won't help your father." And there were vague threats, not actually spoken out loud, of them simply shutting off Dad's life support without my consent. Dad got another 15 years of life because I knew enough biology and science and medicine to be able to speak to the doctors like doctors. During the meetings with Dad's doctors, I would tell them to talk to me like they were speaking to another doctor. I think at first some doctors thought I was pretentious, as many know-it-alls are. Know-it-all, don't really know much. And some seem to go out of their ways to use the most highly complex technical jargon they could to describe my father's condition. I showed them I understood by asking intelligent counter-questions. This ability to show the doctors I was not just another relative in denial is one reason I believe the hospital did not involuntarily terminate Dad's life support. Back to me. Now is my time to expand my life because my timeline is not unlimited. So much of this document so far has been what I call stubs, or mnemonic notes, which will allow me to use this document and some of the paragraphs and sections as the basis for future documents like my mother's biography when I write it, as well as my own biography when I write it, as well as my father's biography when I write it, and plans for the rest of my life, assuming I survive long enough to enact any of my remaining plans. Yes, I know this video has been rambly and disjointed and immature, and why don't I just shut up and do something? This is confusing AF. Ah! I'm sure that's the reaction some of you are having. It's the reaction you're having. This is Brunhilde. I retort to those imaginary trolls that writing this document, recording this video, is something. I'm gathering my thoughts and laying out the beginnings of the rest of my life on this day, Mom's Life Day. One can evade reality, but one cannot usually evade the consequences of evading reality. One can evade reality, but one cannot evade the consequences of evading reality. A future major life goal. Make it to my father's life day, September 9th, 2047, day 32,149 of my life. If you sat through all that video, thank you. We now return you to your regularly scheduled astrology reading. Orion is in the sky. P.S. Potato. That's all.